Are you ready for more mean monarchs in a particularly murderous edition? It's time for another right royal rundown. I'll give you a short list of rulers and you tell me who was the cruddiest king of the crop, who needs to be added to the list. Or maybe you think some of these regents do not deserve to be so ruthlessly remembered as rubbish. Thank you for your amazing suggestions of lamentable leaders on the last video. If you thought that lot were bad, wait till you hear about these regents running rampant during their reigns. Let's meet the contenders. Emperor Andronikos I of Byzantium. Andronikos is remembered for his short but very violent reign, extreme paranoia, and his sadistic nature. He was so awful that historians referred to him as Andronikos Misophaes, which means hater of sunlight, because he had so many of his enemies blinded. Andronikos began his reign by overthrowing the boy emperor Alexios II, making Alexios condemn his own mother to death, and then declare Andronikos as co-emperor. Alexios was then strangled with a bowstring, which, to be fair, was how successions usually seemed to go in the Byzantine Empire. To help support his bid for power, Andronikos happily incited the anti-Latin sentiment in Constantinople, which led to the massacre of the Latins in 1182. This saw mobs attack the Roman Catholic inhabitants of the city. Just after Andronikos rode into town, some 60,000 people are thought to have fled or been murdered, and Andronikos did nothing to stop this. Being neither a fan of dissent nor the nobility, Andronikos had rivals, dissenters, and people who were just standing in the wrong place at the wrong time brutally murdered, and using torture and public executions to instill fear in his people. Many of his victims were blinded or mutilated, and often the charges were very much questionable. Andronikos then conveniently inherited the wealth of his victims, and when it came to suffering, Andronikos believed in equal opportunities, so he heavily taxed and exploited the common folk too. The empire suffered military losses, which increased instability. For example, in 1185, which saw William of Sicily invade to capture crucial territories, influential noble Isaac Angelos resisted arrest for a made-up charge, killing Andronikos' lieutenant, Stephan Hagiochristophates. He then appealed to the people and led a coup against the emperor, and although he tried to flee, Andronikos was captured and handed over to the mob. He then suffered a dose of his own medicine, being tied up, dragged around the city and tortured for 3 days by his many enemies, and anyone who was around really. Andronikos was horribly mutilated, blinded, and eventually chopped to pieces. Amir Timur of the Timurid Empire. Military genius Timur, also known as Tamerlane or Timur the Lame, due to an arrow-based incident in his early life whilst sheep rustling, was a Turco-Mongol conqueror who established the Timurid Empire. His reign is marked by both remarkable achievements and horrific atrocities. After fighting his way up to become imperial ruler of the Chagatai tribe, he then spent the next 35 years fighting everyone else and conquering most of the Islamic world. His reign was a genocidal jaunt of cruelty and mayhem, of razing towns and massacring populations, and destroying cultural and religious sites. Timur's campaigns also resulted in significant cultural and architectural developments in his territory, maybe due to the imported talent from conquests, who were sometimes the only citizens to be spared in bloody massacres. He used terror as a psychological weapon. His reputation for brutality meant many cities surrendered without a fight to avoid total destruction. But let's hear about some of the more horrific examples. The massacre in Isfahan. Isfahan initially immediately surrendered to Timur, but later revolted, as people killed tax collectors and some soldiers. Timur's totally proportional response, "Please don't hurt me, Timur," was to order the massacre of the city's innocent civilians. Reportedly, over 70,000 people were killed, and towers of skulls were erected as a warning to other wannabe rebels, with one eyewitness counting more than 28 towers of about 1,500 heads each. The sack of Delhi and Talamba. Timur invaded India and sacked Talamba in 1398. He then marched on to Delhi, pausing only to slaughter the thousands of slaves who had previously been captured in the Indian campaign, in case they revolted. On the battlefield, Timur set fire to camels to scare the Indian war elephants, which worked. The fleeing elephants trampled their own lines, leading to a devastating victory. Delhi was sacked and reduced to ruins, except for all of those new skull towers. Massacre at the city of Sivas. While purging Anatolia in 1400, Timur's invading army approached the city of Sivas, and hoping for peace, the citizens brought forth their own children, each holding a Quran. But Timur ordered his cavalry to trample the children. The people surrendered, and Timur promised that their blood would not be shed if they did so. Instead, he buried them alive. The sack of Damascus. After beating down the army of the Mamluk Sultan in 1401, Timur totally promised that he wouldn't sack the city if the enemy withdrew, but of course he did, burning much of Damascus. When the imams begged Timur for mercy, he advised them to take shelter in the mosques. He then locked the doors and burnt over 30,000 men, women and children alive. The destruction of Baghdad. In 1401, fast-moving Timur invaded Baghdad, and similar to Isfahan, he ordered the construction of towers made from skulls of the dead, and that every soldier bring in a quota of heads, or else they could contribute their own. The soldiers killed citizens, prisoners, and even their own wives to meet their quotas. The siege of Smyrna. When Timur besieged Smyrna, he blew up the walls and massacred the inhabitants, and then he catapulted the heads at passing enemy ships. Timur also sent a lot of very insulting letters to pen pal Bayezid I, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, but I suppose that doesn't seem so bad now in comparison. Despite all of this, Timur still had time to have 43 wives and concubines. Whilst en route to invade China in 1405, Timur fell ill and died, marking the end of his expansionist campaigns, and having done little to establish true governance in the lands he conquered, his empire soon disintegrated thereafter. And hey, talking of heavily distressing experiences, why don't you subscribe? Philip IV of France. Tall, fine-featured and blonde, hence his nickname Philip the Fair. But he was not fair by nature. Philip's rule was controversial, ruthless, and marked by misdeeds, especially mass murder. He was also known as the Iron King for his imposing and rigid rule, where he sought uncontested power at the expense of his nobles. Fierce opponent Bishop Bernard said of Philip,
"He is neither man nor beast, he is a statue."
Philip tried to tax the clergy, leading to conflict with Pope Boniface VIII, who excommunicated Philip. Philip snapped back by sending troops to capture the Pope in 1303, holding him captive for 3 days, and beating him badly before the townsfolk rose up and freed Boniface. After his release, Pope Boniface died a month later. Rumour had it that he died in a frenzied fever, gnawing at his hands and beating his brains out against the wall. But this was disproven in 1605, when the body was somehow accidentally exhumed and found to be intact, especially his apparently very shapely hands. In 1306, Philip expelled the Jewish population from France. This action was driven by the desire to cancel debts owed to Jewish moneylenders and to seize their wealth for the crown. Then, in 1307, Philip ordered the simultaneous arrest of hundreds of Knights Templars across France. I wonder if this had something to do with the massive debts that Philip owed to the organisation. The Templars were subjected to severe torture to extract confessions of heresy, blasphemy, and other crimes. New Pope Clement V knew better than to disagree with Philip, and in 1312, with the king's encouragement, he officially dissolved the order of the Knights Templar, leaving Philip to burn many Templars at the stake without trial. And Philip's reign was also marked by military conflicts. His attempts to exert control over Flanders resulted in a series of brutal battles, including the Battle of the Golden Spurs in 1302, a crushing defeat for both the French army and the French finances. Philip debased the currency to finance his wars, causing inflation and economic hardship for the French populace. His policies led to widespread discontent among both the nobility and the common people. Philip died in 1314, reportedly from a stroke during a hunt. King Richard II of England, known for his authoritarian tendencies, conflicts with nobility, and dramatic downfall. After the death of his grandfather, King Edward III, Richard succeeded to the English throne at just 10 years old, and in 1381 he faced a major challenge. Due to high taxes and discontent, the Peasants' Revolt broke out, with the rebels demanding the absolute abolition of serfdom. 14-year-old Richard, who lacked the forces to disperse the rebels, initially met with them and promised reforms and clemency, and they believed him because they believed Richard was their king. However, once the rebels returned home, Richard reneged on his promises and brutally butchered the remaining insurgents and sought out and executed the leaders of the revolt without trial. This put a lust into Richard, a lust for absolute power. Richard alienated his nobles through his favoritism towards certain courtiers, and favoritism leads to factionalism. In 1387, a group of nobles we now call the Lords Appellant confronted Richard after seeing off Richard's backup forces at the Battle of Radcot Bridge. These lords forced Richard to condemn and execute a number of his court loyalists, and broke up his circle of favourites and weakened his hold on absolute power. Richard made out like everything was fine, that there would be peace, that he was their king. But Richard was a vengeful man, and he could wait years for his vengeance. Years later, in 1397, Richard retaliated, and the Lords Appellant found themselves either arrested, executed, or exiled. Richard confiscated lands and fined the supporters of the Lords, which created fantastic revenues, but wasn't particularly legal as such. That is, unless the Lords colluded with Richard. Don't worry guys, I'm sure Richard won't find a way to turn you against each other. Thomas de Mowbray and Henry Bolingbroke have a deep disagreement about a small treasonous matter, so Richard calls for a duel to take place, except then he changes his mind and exiles them both instead. Shortly after, in 1399, when Henry's father John of Gaunt dies, Richard disinherited Henry and conveniently kept Henry's very rich and lush lands for himself. Richard sat back and enjoyed his tyrannical rule. Now everyone had to refer to Richard with more reverence, and sometimes he would sit on his throne for hours without speaking, and anyone on whom his eyes fell had to bow to the king. Totally normal king stuff. Richard's court was known for its extravagance and wasteful spending. Richard bypassed parliament and ruled through royal decrees. He imposed heavy taxes to fund his luxurious lifestyle and ambitious building projects. But hey, at least Richard had a fancy new Westminster Hall, and he relied on his own private army rather than through levies from his nobles, because he didn't see why they should have any say over his absolute power. But hey, remember this guy? Henry Bolingbroke wants to reclaim his lands, and he raises a retinue and returns to England in 1399 to take over whilst Richard is off on campaign in Ireland. Richard arrives home only to be captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London. He was forced to abdicate in favour of new man Henry IV, who totally promised to spare Richard's life. In 1400, after being transferred to Pontefract Castle, Richard died in mysterious circumstances, possibly starved to death. So, who is the worst king of these contenders? If you enjoyed this video, giving it a like really helps me out. And subscribe if you want to. Check out more bad kings in this video here.